Hey,
Hello,
here we
uh,
are. We're live.
we're live. Why are we here today? I guess I could say that we have Jonathan and Noahide, and me, Trey, who's more suspicious of Noahides, and would say that they would be a modern religious movement. Of course, Jonathan disagrees, and I guess I wanted to do the stream because I've been trying to figure out what is the modern day Noahide movement, what is it organized around, as well as what will look like in the future. And I think me and Jonathan have some interesting things to discuss.
Yeah. Well, where do you want to start?
Um, I guess I'll link it in the chat just to talk about. I kind of wanted to start with the article, um, because
That
I
that
feel
paper. That paper.
yeah the paper.
Okay.
I'll link it in the chat. So to give some context, um, there was, I guess, a research student who went into the Philippines and investigated the largest Noahide community. And the reason that they all became Noahides is because I believe there was a pastor that was somehow linked to, I guess, Seventh day Adventist movements as well as sort of uh, Messianic Christian movements, and eventually they fully transitioned into just being righteous Gentiles. Um, and so the article sort of highlights some interesting points with that. Yeah. What did you think of the article?
I mean, it was. It had some like general information that I thought was relevant to the discussion, but I mean, the deep dive into Noahide communities in the Philippines, I thought was a little bit like a little too specific for thinking about Noahides as or Noahide movement more generally, like globally and right now. Um, I thought that there were certainly some errors in terms of how the um, those particular Filipino Noahides like viewed themselves in relationship to Judaism, or like and whether or not those errors were in the translation from the author, who doesn't particularly seem like a friendly towards either Judaism or Noahidism, but or if it was just the mistake of that community, or something was lost in translation, because like um, there was some like a quote here about
You're talking about the different souls, right? Or that,
well that yeah that there was like a racial superiority to
yeah,
Jews, which is like not like that is not the way I or most Noahides, or even any Orthodox rabbis have really spoken. So I'm a little skeptical of the whole article because of some of those like pretty obvious um, like mistakes. So I mean, what I can say though is like there are certainly, and I'm not an expert, and I'm not part of a particular Noahide community. Um, and I don't have a lot in common with some of the like kind of like Torah observant um, Christians, or like some of those church groups that are clustered around geographical areas like in the south of the United States, or in like the Philippines, for instance, where you know whole communities have kind of made the transition. I'm a little more of a one-off, isolated case.
yeah. Um, oh, yeah. So I just want to read the quote, I think, on page 122. I think that's the one you're talking about, just so we can give context.
Yeah,
Uh, okay, 122. Uh,
yeah. I put
Jeremiah.
it. Should we put it up on the screen?
Yes. To, to present screen. Okay. Here we go. Jeremiah, a 31-year-old man from the Islamic community, reiterated the genealogical differences between Jews and Noahides, implying that the racial differences among the descendants of Noah account for the success and power of various nations. We are all children of Noah, but after Nimrod, we separated. You are very lucky because you are white, and white people are rulers of the earth. But you are also Jew. You are very gifted because you have blood from the chosen people, from Abraham and Isaac. And Abraham's children who became Muslim and also became very wealthy. The idea of a hierarchical, racialized difference between Jews and Noahides was addressed again in life by community president Manuel, who was visiting for the occasion of the Noahide wedding. I don't need to read this. So, yeah. I have some understanding of why that could be. Because I think we can both admit, if someone has access to like the Talmud and as well as many of these writings just specifically online, and they don't really have any context around them, I think they could get that interpretation. Or do you disagree with that?
I mean, you can certainly find a lot of anti-Semitic, Talmudic quotes taken out of context all around the internet. You don't have to look very hard to find that kind of stuff, and but you don't really have to look that much harder to find the arguments that would like debunk or put those things in context. So I mean, this is a very fringe take in this paper. Oh yeah, and probably just crank the size up on that document,
yeah,
if you could.
Is this good? More? Less?
Yeah, I mean, maybe a little more for the folks at home. Man, there you go.
Okay.
Giant. Yeah, I mean, so like, I guess there's not a lot to this paper that I thought was, like, there's no smoking gun in here. I guess if that's kind of like what you were thinking. I mean, the typical Noahide these days tends to be, at least in my experience and what I've encountered on the internet, is a post or ex-Christian variety. Usually in the Western world, I don't know too many. I don't know of too many Muslims who are leaving Islam to become, I guess, Noahides per se. But I guess in a lot of cases, they're closer by default to Noahide law keeping.
Yeah.
At least according to the standards of Judaism. So, but I guess some of these, like, getting into like the whole questions of like the difference between Jewish and Gentile souls and some of these more like esoteric teachings, I think are just like mostly irrelevant, and I think in a lot of cases either like weaponized for either an anti-Semitic agenda or just drilled into and taken out of context, like for kind of more salacious purposes, but they don't really have anything to do with I think what a typical Noahide is going to be most concerned with.
Yes, but so I do want to say that the typical Noahide is the Filipino, like on average, the largest community of Noahides, percentage-wise, is in the Philippines.
Sure, but I think that we are very, very early in, what I think would be a larger Noahide movement, which is, getting into the realm of like, maybe not like apocalyptic prediction, but just prediction, right? I think there's a confluence of factors that I think this paper does comment on, like the rise of just the internet, right? Like the stage is being set. The conditions are now more than in the past ripe for knowledge of Judaism, the general decline of Christianity in the West, maybe you could say, And so those things I think are converging where, it's created an opportunity where it didn't exist before for non-Jews to embrace Judaism.
Yeah. Yeah. What did you think my idea of presenting the article was for?
But I think what?
Why do you think I presented this article? Why do you think I was like, oh,
I can't read your mind, Trey. Why did you present the article?
okay. Well, I guess I'm just curious. I guess what this article sort of highlights is something I find interesting is that like, this is I think probably one of the religions that can only exist because of the internet. Specifically, I say this because I think I'm more interested in how the Third Temple Institute factors into these communities and how these communities are working. So in the paper, it mentions that there was some like that these Filipinos would actually not do anything on the Sabbath, right? And
Yep.
they understood that through their local leaders. But then they contacted the Third Temple Institute because they were the only ones who really responded. And then they said, okay, don't do it on Sabbath. And they started giving more rules and sort of educating us. And I think that it's interesting. And I think that the Jewish community should really, like, personally, I think the Jewish community needs to have a little bit more influence, I guess, with this. Because I think it's worrying from the outside to have, like, one organization be the sole authority on what noahides can be.
Well, I think you touch on a larger problem, which is that for a lot of these, particularly these Christian groups, right, they become more Torah observant through their own reading of Scripture, and so they're kind of on their own, and they sort of fall into this interpretation of Scripture and this new behavioral practice, right? And so they're like, well, I mean, the Torah was never abrogated, so we should rest on the Sabbath. And they don't really know what that all entails, right? Because there's only so much that's revealed about that in the written Torah. So, they kind of make a naive attempt at following the precepts of, Jewish law, which they also, I think, mistakenly believe that they're under, right? The Ten Commandments is not for the Gentiles. Right. Which I think, like, if you say that to a random, Gentile, they're going to be like, well, what are you talking about? The Ten Commandments is for everybody. It's in the Bible, right? Or like any Christian. So they, there are some surprising nuances that I think for the uninitiated that are not going to be clear if you don't have leadership and guidance. So when they do finally reach out to the right Orthodox Jewish community or institution, then suddenly they become aware of a lot of these things, and so they change their practices accordingly because they already have the conditions of responding to Judaism. Like they're already willing to be taught, to learn, and so a lot of them will make the adjustments. I mean, it makes sense that they would make those adjustments. And I mean, there's obviously controversy amongst rabbis in terms of like, what mitzvot can and cannot be, or should not be done by non-Jews. So that's a separate argument, but like, I think, and so there are not that many sort of go-to authorities on the matter. And, I think that's changing slowly. I mean, it's going to take time, but, just between Rabbi Shirky's organization with that, Chezi is working with, and, the Third Temple Institute. And like, I'm not actually deeply familiar with all of these different groups. And, I know that there's probably a little bit of, I definitely know that there's some deviation between them on terms of like what's permissible, what's not permissible, how they teach, what they teach. And, even within those groups or between those groups, there's usually not a whole lot of like controversy. It's really more about like between the rabbis, it's not as controversial. I've heard that said, right? So like, the issue of like keeping mitzvot for Noahides, right? But it is highly consequential to the Noahide, right? Because they want to know what they should do or not do, right? And there's no established authoritative sort of law book. I mean, some of the closest you're going to get are, um, you know, Brit Olam or Brit Shalom, which is the book we're working through with Hezi. There's this one, which is a thicker, more detailed book called The Divine Code. This is a translation into English from the Hebrew by Rabbi Moshe Weiner, and I have barely cracked this one. It's pretty dense, but I mean, there's a lot of unexplored terrain, and I think what's interesting is that like I said, the stage has been set now in this particular time and place and in this context for the flourishing of Gentile participation and practice of Judaism in their own particular way. And one of the unique things about Judaism versus Christianity and Islam is they don't require conversion. So there are different laws and different guidelines for the different types of people, and even within Judaism, and I guess even within Christianity, frankly, I mean there are different rules and different responsibilities, different roles to play. But not every Jew is a Levite, right? The Levites are the priests, but the Jews are priests in a priestly nation, right? So I think that there is, hopefully there will be a more unified sort of knowledge base and like a more centralized authority for Noahides, but I don't necessarily know that that's necessary or even desirable. Maybe more necessary. I mean, maybe it's desirable, but like, and I think there are some nuances to Jewish beliefs and practice that will necessarily apply to Noahides as well. They don't translate as easily from like Christianity, particularly certain branches of Christianity that come from very like centralized, top-down, hierarchical authorities, right? So it's like you've got like the true church and like strict orthodoxy, very very like strongly strong boundaries, and while those things do exist in Judaism, they exist in a very different way in some cases.
Yeah. So I guess my perspective on this, and I think why I find it interesting, is I think comparing it to the early restorationist movements in the 1900s. As I see a lot of similar things. So specifically talking about with the Jehovah's Witnesses, during that time, there wasn't really an idea of centralized authority. It was pretty much a bunch of newspapers putting out basically, hey, we don't believe the soul's immortal, or hey, we believe you should say the divine name, right? And you had all these little small groups, right, that didn't really ask for anything from their members. They just said, here's a newspaper, here's some things to think about. You can still go to church and do all these things. And I think what changed during those times, there's like literally like hundreds of groups similar to the Witnesses, all sort of floating around. But I think the reason Witnesses came together is because I think Rutherford, the second person sort of succeeding Russell, so you can say just like our Paul, pretty much took hold of everything and made it so that things were codified, things were pretty much together. We have an identity. And I think that that's something I worry about in the Noahide community, is that I think evolutionarily, like, it makes sense that a leader with a stronger identity of what he thinks Noahides are, it maybe make more allegiance. I do think the difference is that like it's so spread out that it's hard to do. But I would say that like I just think it just takes a crazy rabbi who's a bit messianic to sort of gain a lot of control, and I think that's something I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can. There's a couple different ways that could play out. So I expect there to emerge from the Noahide community, the population of Noahides in the world, leaders, right?
Yeah.
Who are non-Jewish, Gentile Noahide leaders who will play a particular role of, I guess, leadership in all the various capacities. You could imagine though, like a situation, like imagine if Jordan Peterson came out and said, I've embraced Judaism, but I'm not converting. I'm gonna stay in Noahide, and like there are a lot of potential ways for the movement to expand rapidly. And I mean, a lot of it's just going to be exposure and awareness, right? And it's like it'll be slowly at first, and then it will like a technology steepening. It will go parabolic over time. So I think we're in the very, very early innings. It feels strange to say that because it's like it feels a little awkward to say like I'm one of the first. Obviously, I'm not one of the first Noahides, but like you're going to start seeing, I think, more of these sort of trickles of individuals popping up, and it's going to be less about like a community that already pre-existed, right? You're going to have a lot more atomic, I think, people, and they're going to find each other, and they're going to coalesce around a geography, for instance, right? But there's not a paradigm of Noahide community per se that isn't like usually that doesn't originate in a like a church and a pre-existing community, right? Because like there is no equivalent or obligation, frankly, for like I don't need to go and pray with anybody else. I mean, there are obviously like human needs and like nice to have things that just are part of the way of the world, but like you're not gonna. I don't think you're gonna necessarily see. Well, I do think you're gonna start seeing like. Well, that remains to be seen. Like, are you going to see like specific Noahide shuls, or are you going to see more integration with the existing Jewish community? Which, I mean, that's it's hard to envision that, but I think it's not separate, right? Like they're it's different manifestations, different different contexts, but it's the same God. It's all part of the same overall purpose, right? And so it's sort of like asking like it's like if you're the best analogy I can usually come up with is like imagine you're in a church that's full of priests. Everyone's a priest. They just happen to all be priests, and but they're like, hey, you can join this church, but you don't have to become a priest. You don't need to be a priest to like be a part of this church. But like you're like, well, yeah, but everybody's a priest. Like, what about the non-priests, right? And there's like lots of non-priests out there who are not part of this church, and so it's almost like becoming a layperson in Judaism, where all the Jews are priests. And all the Gentiles are the lay people. And like you don't have Christians like running around like, in sackcloth and ashes because they're not priests. I mean, some of them do, but like most of them don't. Right. Like it doesn't like bother most people that, or most like, let's say Catholic or Orthodox, that like the clergy have a different or, special relationship to God. Even a mediating role, God forbid. and that's okay. So, I mean, I don't see anything wrong with, um, looking to the Jewish people as, the priests among the nations. That's
Yeah,
the way God did it.
yeah. I think you and I just have different ideas, I guess, of how religion works. Like to me, what I see is there's going to be a bunch of Seventh-day Adventists or messianic, sort of like I'm trying to find the card of the seven tribes. Here it is.
Well, so I don't mean this
Yeah.
12 tribes at the card. Like if your model of religion though is more akin to a cult,
No, no. I want to sort of explain
Yeah,
what I
go
mean.
ahead. Go ahead.
So, like, what I'm holding up is, I think, 12 tribes. I'm not saying noahides is a cult. What I'm saying is, I don't really think it's an individual thing where someone looks at their Bible and says, "Oh, I'm becoming noahide." I think it's more or less. I have friends who are noahides. I have friends who are showing this to me. I have internet influences, and I think where you get the big conversions and what happened in the Philippines is you have a Seventh Day Adventist organization that the pastor realizes, oh, you know what? Jesus isn't the Messiah. We're going to have to go and
We got to regroup.
we got to regroup. And I feel like that's usually how those changes. Like for example, like the biggest Unitarians come from a pastor who realized that he is a Unitarian, and then his church follows along. Like that's usually how things work. And I think going
Yes.
back to the Filipino example, I
Yeah.
think that is a translation and information of high level, very detailed. Okay, this is the difference between Gentiles and Jews, and the layperson's understanding. And I think those are two different things.
Yes. I'm. It's probably going to be messy if there are mass, and I wouldn't even call them conversions, but deconversions or something, right? Like, I mean, you're not converting to Noahidism. You're basically in these situations, they're walking away from Christianity, right?
Yeah.
They're rejecting that, but they're not rejecting the God of Israel. They're not rejecting the Hebrew Bible. They're actually embracing it in a different way because they've sort of realized that they're going back to their roots. I mean, I find it interesting. I mean, I'm sure Christians convert to Islam, but when they're doing so, they're not doing so with sort of a conscious, like, I'm becoming a Noahide, even though a lot of Islam is, kind of default Noahide in terms of its adherence to the
Right.
laws.
That's
On
something we can
paper.
talk about because I don't really think these just like.
So let me just finish the thought. So
Sorry.
I do expect there to be like lots of wacky ideas out there, lots of wacky lay people ideas, and it's not necessarily a problem. And in fact, you can even there's ongoing debate of whether or not Christianity is considered Noahide and whether or not Christianity is okay and permissible for a Gentile, right? And if so, then there's not necessarily a need to reject or leave it. Although it would be a little bit awkward to continue to embrace it, the more you sort of know and understand and accept, Judaism. But yeah, so it's. I guess I would expect the phenomenon that you're describing of churches, groups, right? Led by a leader, led by some kind of a community-driven change. I think that that's also going to be augmented though by the anonymous individual, or kind of random groups of people who, like I say, like coalesce and find themselves in a either a virtual or just like an accidental geographical community, and possibly even larger than just kind of an ad hoc fringe Christian group, because I think there are some Christians who are more receptive to Judaism than others, right? I mean, obviously, if you don't ever read the Hebrew Bible at all, then how would you really ever know, right? If like you just have a continuous diet of the Pauline epistles and the Gospels, and the church's liturgical life, like it's never going to occur to you to question it or to like start thinking about like the problems. So, I mean, my personal path was one of deconstruction and then reconstruction, starting from the beginning, and then like kind of going back to. I mean, I looked at the Hebrew Bible without a Christian lens, like just as a counterfactual. I mean, I know Christianity, but like I was like, well, if I were to look at this and assume that Christianity is not true or doesn't exist, like, does it demand Christianity? And the answer I thought was no. So, I, so then I just stopped there. But there are lots of different stories of people come to it from all different flavors and all different ways, even though I think there's some thematic, similarities across them. But I don't think Noahides, they should not be a cult.
Right, but like that's also my worry, is that like I think that either you have 20 different ideas that can't really coalesce under the flag of Noahide, or what you have is 20 different ideas that became solidified into one idea because it's stronger than the others. And I think also what I sort of pair this with is this idea of how much you want to take on versus how little you want to take on. And it makes sense to me that like
yeah. Oh, finish with that.
Yeah, just like it makes sense to me that like an identity can be better constructed on a, you could say, harder Noahidism than a lesser Noahidism. And what I mean by that difference
is
how deep you get into it.
So, yeah, especially coming from, a highly liturgical or ritualized Christianity, for instance, right? You're sort of left with like, well, don't murder, don't steal, like a lot of like, what we all consider pretty obvious, relatively easy to follow, at least superficially, laws. So it's like, well, I've got those checked off, right? And then it's like, don't be an idolater. Okay, well then I'll be extra careful not to be an idolater, right? And so you're like, okay, so as of right now, I'm committing, as far as I can tell, no, I'm not violating any of the Noahide laws. So I'm living a righteous life according to what God has commanded me, right? So on Saturday morning, what do I do? Or Sunday, well, obviously Sunday morning, I'm not doing anything, but like, what am I going to do on Saturday? Like, I don't know. That's on one hand, like there is no obligation, right? Like it's a pretty limited set of laws. I mean, they go deep. I mean, if you really, want to understand, the true nuances and like the depth of some of those laws, it's like, okay, like, we're probably all a lot more doing a lot more stealing than we might initially think, right? But like those are all like avoidance, like negative commandments, right? Like don't do this, don't do that, avoid that, right? There's not a lot of positive commandments.
Of course.
There's like establishing, courts of justice, but that's a collective commandment. That's not one that like an individual is necessarily responsible for. Or like, I mean, your responsibility is only a piece, right? And so like you have a very contextual responsibility to that commandment. But there is no like, you got to pray 3 times a day. You got to, go to this ritual once a week and, do these things. You don't have to make a sacrifice. You can, but you don't have to. And so, yeah, I mean, so a lot of it is voluntary, right? And so there's going to be people who I think are naturally going to be more, they're going to gravitate more towards a, I want to do more. I want to feel like I'm a part of this, right? And they want to have that connection to God. I mean, hopefully that's what's driving it, right? And so, but I mean, this is a little, maybe, I'm not sure if it's sacrilegious, but I mean, there are other people for whom they're just gonna be like, I'm good. I'm going to follow these laws. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to do what God wants. And I'm not really going to sweat, overdoing it, like it doesn't bother me that I don't keep the Sabbath. I don't need to keep the Sabbath. You know, I don't have to, so I don't need to, and I'm okay with that. I can totally admire, respect, really be like, I can understand what the Sabbath is and why it's so important and why it's such a gift um, to the Jewish people, but it doesn't need to like bother me at all that I don't keep it.
Yeah,
And so there's a lot of, I think, very, very like deep seated, um, cultural and religious baggage, you know, that comes with the territory of leaving Christianity for, you know, a like almost a qualitatively different type of religion, even though, it's still hopefully the same God that I've always known. And I pray roughly the same. You know, I have almost a nearly identical moral code. Um, so it's really like mostly about how you sort of, um, it's almost a psychological effect of being like, wow, like, okay, like um, it's actually quite a burden being lifted that like I don't need to worry so much about all the particularities of all these ritual things, right?
right. But I feel that you're not expecting any mutations to occur. So, like, for
Am I
example,
expecting? Am I expecting what?
you're not
Mutations?
expecting mutations to happen, and I
Oh,
think that's, and
well,
I want to
mutations
talk
of
about,
what?
well,
Mutations of
like,
what?
well, I would say like the Jewish principle of putting a fence around something,
Okay, yeah,
and like I would say the transition from saying the divine name or at least uttering it in certain practices, and then eventually never doing it at all. And to me, I'm like, well, I could imagine the same idea of like a fence around establishing courts. Wait. You're saying that we have to establish courts. Wait. I think we need to do more. I think we need to preach on every single block. Okay. Then we're extending. Like, I feel like you're missing the idea of the Jewish discussion that simple laws can sort of become utterly complex after mutations occur. And I feel like all these seven Noahide laws can definitely have mutations. Like, what does it mean to really steal? Does it mean if I look at my like I especially someone from a Christian background could say, well, if I'm looking at at another woman, I'm stealing her, right?
yeah,
Like,
sure, yeah, right. Well, I mean, for that, we look to the wisdom and the teaching of Judaism, right? Because that is going to unpack a lot of the overlapping commandments and what's entailed by that. Even though maybe the some of the particularities, the punishments, like whatever, like might differ, right? But
yes,
um, I don't know how much like the sort of Noahide sage can kind of go solo in terms of expositing the Noahide laws. Like will it always be sort of needing to be um, seen through the lens of Judaism, like Orthodox Judaism per se, or will it kind of be like will it have its own kind of rabbinical authority? Um, and um, there might be an answer to that I don't know, but I think there will certainly be more exposition of what the laws entail and like the practical applications of those laws, right? And so like, but it's okay for people to you know move in the right direction. Are you getting closer or further away, right? And or even to start, are you orientated in the right direction? So it's not a problem that these things may that the laws, the applications, and the fences may over time. Um, I think like I mean sort of I don't know if it's quintessential, but like one sort of thing people ask, like, well, okay, so used to be a Christian, now I'm a Noahide. Can I have a Christmas tree? Right? That comes up a lot, right? Because Christmas trees are like very like deeply embedded in American Western culture, Christian culture. Like we do Christmas trees, right? And like everybody knows, like sure, maybe it was an old pagan thing that Christianity co-opted, but like no one's worshiping the tree. Yeah, maybe not. Whatever, it doesn't matter, right? But like it's a decoration, right?
Yeah.
It is now. It is now for everybody. It's a decoration, and it's so all the old significance, purpose, symbolism. I mean, that's not even on the radar anymore, right? Now, so is it that big of a deal, right? Well, probably not. But for some Noahides, they're going to say like, no, absolutely not. You shouldn't have a Christmas tree. And I mean, maybe that's an ideal. That's a fence, or a fence around like an idolatrous practice. I mean, even if a Jew were to put a Christmas tree in their house for decorative purposes, right? Like they're obviously not doing it for any sort of idolatry, but it's forbidden, right? And so I think that's where kind of the or some of these fences play out, and people are going to come from different places, and that's why you need to have that's why you have to have that rabbinical guidance, especially in the early days. Because you need to train the leaders that will understand how to answer the questions. And unlike, I mean, yeah. So say more now.
Well, I guess that's also, I mean, that's why I'm trying to coalesce all these ideas. I think that, and that's what I feel like I'm convincing you more of, is I think when we have previously, before this talk, I think your idea with Noahide is like, it's simple, it's straight. And I'm like, wait, hold up. A lot of things similar to this have gone wrong. And there's been many groups who have been trying to do this sort of transition from very Christian minded into a Jewish mind, and it hasn't really been well. And I think I want to highlight, I do think that there needs to be more rabbinical authorities, because as I've been reading these stories more and more, I think Dan Smith mentioned it in the chat, talking about these different groups, Messianic Temple in Texas, which is one I read, is that there's sort of the smorgasbord. Like, you have women wearing head wraps, you have the guys wearing tzitzis, or they're like, they're growing out their beards, right? But they're never going to convert, or they say they may convert, right? And you have all these people juggling all these things, and that's where I see the difference, is that like you're having, it does not seem like a cohesive movement, which is fine, but it just seems like there's going to be a bunch of mutations, and I feel like with mutations, there's something that's going to go awry.
Well, remember there's there are the people who follow the 7 Noahide laws because they make sense to them logically. They've figured this out from their own reason, right? And I think it's the Rambam calls them the wise among the nations. And then there are those who follow those laws because they were commanded by God, right? So it presupposes a belief in God and a submission to God, and those are the righteous among the nations, right? So there's a difference there, just in terms of like, you can follow the law, great, but you can actually accept the law because it was given by God, and you cannot follow it as well as somebody who just follows it but doesn't accept it as given by God, and there is a difference.
Yeah, but I that's the difference. I would say that like those examples would be 0.001%, because that's just not how people convert to religions. Like, people convert because they have friends who are of those religions, or who are talking about those ideas. And I think there's a difference.
Wait. So let's take it one step back though, because I don't know if I agree with that statement. There are lots of people who convert to different religions to the detriment of their social standing in their community, right? I mean, it happens all the time. Yes, I'm sure. I would say, if anything, most people stay within their religion because of the social pressures of doing so, because that's just what they were born into. So how would they know any better? Why would they even think about it? There are plenty of people who just go through life and just sort of accept the status quo. I mean, you could maybe say that, like, the more contrarian, cantankerous, unique snowflake artistic folks might be more apt to, like, consider alternative religious views or other, like, all sorts of alternative views that, like, differ from their sort of received tradition, right? But, like, I don't, I guess, and even if, like, from a pure numbers game, that the statistical that the majority of like converts to a religion happen through some kind of, like, small scale social contagion kind of situation, doesn't necessarily negate the relevancy or the sincerity of that conversion. I mean, I think it's important also to say that, like, you don't convert to Noahidism.
I would say you do.
Well, I mean,
I can have an explanation for that.
You change your beliefs and practices and stuff, but there's no, like, initiation ritual per se. Like, there's no baptism. There's no reciting a creed. I mean, you can do it. It's sort of an optional thing. But, like,
well, I have a question for you, Jonathan. Right?
Yeah.
Let's say I'm hanging out with Noahides, and I have a cross on my neck. What do I do with the cross?
What do you do with it?
Yes.
Whatever you want. What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you do with it?
Are you saying I could be an active Noahide and wear a big cross chain around my neck?
I think you should talk to your rabbi. But, I mean,
come on.
I think you could. I think you could. I mean, I think it would be. I would question it after a while. I would wonder why you were doing it after a certain amount of time. Like, I mean, so I mean, you in order to actually make this, like, that, like, scenario make sense, you actually have to, like, role play this a little more. So, okay, so you and all your Noahide pals are hanging out, and all of a sudden, like, are you just showing up with a cross one day that you didn't wear it the day prior, or, like, have you always worn that cross?
I've always worn that cross, and basically this is the first time that, like, basically I'm wearing a low cut shirt or something like that.
Okay, so so you've got this chain you've been wearing. You wear a low cut shirt, and you scandalize all your Noahide bros because you're wearing this cross, and you're like, well, I've always been wearing this cross. So I guess, are you a Noahide in this scenario?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So you're like, yeah, like, I consider myself a Noahide. Okay. Well, I mean, like,
I feel like this is, like, way too far into this hypothetical, because I feel like the answer is easy.
Well, so what's the point? What's the point you're trying to make with this situation, though?
Well, like, I would say that there's a sort of renouncing of your previous beliefs. I mean, I would say that, like, I've heard references, at the very least, that, like, to be a true Noahide, you have to renounce Jesus as God.
I think that's to be a true Noahide. I mean, you cannot believe that the human being, a human being is God. Correct.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are, but I guess, like, I say that, but there are probably ways in which it is, let's just say, barely qualifiable.
Right, but, like, this is the difference between, I guess, how you're thinking of it. You're thinking of these thinky talky things, and I'm thinking of the Filipino guy in the Philippines who's like, the priest says this, so I'm moving on with this. And I think that's your average person. Like, that's how I think religion works. I don't think it's every single person has this, like, crazy research and then is able to convert, because I think atheism is more likely to be a live option. Like, yeah.
So I actually think that I disagree with that. Like, maybe that's how it is now, or maybe that's how it is under, like, a lot of Christianity, where the people are kind of sheeple, right? and they sort of just follow the pastor's lead. And you might even say that there's something about Christianity that sort of like encourages that. I guess like, do you know? I don't know much about like Islamic communities, for instance, but like, does Islam work that way? Like, are the imams like basically just like they're the thinkers and everybody else just falls in line like a soldier and don't think for themselves?
I'm just saying what studies have.
Oh, okay. So, well, let's go back to this.
What I've heard of is pretty much it's communities. It's not that they've arrived through it through some argumentation. It's just that they have local people groups, and I feel like
somebody arrived there. Somebody arrived there through argumentation, right?
Well, I would say that would be a mutation. Yeah, like 1 in a million. Yeah, but the average person is going to what their parents do, what their society around them do, and sort of fall in line with that.
Okay, and I would probably admit that like as Noahide become more numerous, you're going to start seeing more of those dynamics, I guess. But so what? Like, what's I guess what's the like you're talking to a thinky talky Noahide then, and we're in a thinky talky space. So like, what do you think is different than, or like I guess like what's the purpose of like sort of pointing to this phenomenon and saying like, well, this happens over here. It's like, well, okay, so what?
Well, because I feel like that's where you get the bad things happening. It's like when you're thinking like, oh, people just operate this way. People are always logical.
Well, what are the bad things? Like you're going to end up with these like some like just crazy Noahide cults.
Yeah,
that could definitely happen.
Yeah, and I would say like that's why we need more rabbinical authorities. That's why I think like we need to.
100%. Oh yeah, dude. This could. I mean, like I think Torah observant Christians are like the blind leading the blind. I mean, I think these are kind of ridiculous. I mean, it's good, like it's commendable that they're trying, but they're doing it wrong. Like some kid that was like pulling weeds out of my garden like last summer showed up, and I think he had these little like clip-on TC on his like belt hoops, and I was busy and like didn't want to even bother asking because I didn't want to open up that can of worms, right? But like I was like, what kind of weird fringy, no pun intended, Christianity are you playing? Like, and so these kind of like goofy Jewish LARPing things that like the Messianic Christians, or not Messianic Christians, I guess, but like, yeah, like, it's like, I don't know. I mean, that's not my experience. That's not like particularly relevant to me, but like, obviously these things will have to mature over time. And like, I think this is just the nature of having a nascent movement that is, and again, I hate calling it a movement, a nascent phenomenon, because it's not a movement. It's not like, it in some ways it is. I guess maybe in some ways it is. I'm not comfortable calling it a movement because that implies a lot of things about it that I think are not accurate.
Okay. I do want to talk about that. I don't think we're gonna get that far, but I do want to at least like enlighten on things I've learned, why I sort of disagree that these are like we can have these one-to-one comparisons, I guess. But is there anything else you want to talk about, like just where noahides are right now and any of the communities, or should we move into?
I mean, look, my exposure to it is, the rando people who show up on like Rabbi Schulman's like Noahide, path, like Zoom meetings that are broadcast on YouTube. I mean, there's there's a smattering of people around the internet. I don't, besides like Antonio and a couple of one-off folks who live thousands and thousands of miles away from me, I don't really have a Noahide community to speak of, and so it's extremely early, and it's like, I mean, you were too young probably to remember this, but like, back in the day, it used to be, most people had like a beige PC on their desk, right? It was a like a Windows 95,
Yeah.
In the 90s it was like Compaq, Packard Bell, right? All these like brown beige PCs, CRT monitors and shit. Anyway, so that was like what everybody used, right? But then there was the occasional Mac person, some kind of a holdout from like the 80s, right? Somebody who like was a Mac person. They've been a Mac person forever, or they like worked in a highly specialized field that like had like Mac software, like they were like designers or artist types or whatever, right? But the Mac was some sort of like, goofy off-brand computer that like wasn't compatible with anything. You couldn't do anything on it. Like, nothing was compatible. And then suddenly, well, I shouldn't even say suddenly, but it was once the sort of laptop started becoming more of a thing, and Apple started creating these really compact, fairly well-powered laptops called iBooks that had this new technology on it called Wi-Fi, right? And the internet had kind of just, the internet had transitioned from like dial-up to like more broadband, right? So you got this like perfect storm of the confluence of a bunch of technologies where, and like the proliferation of the World Wide Web, right? And like web applications and being able to do more things in a browser. Well,
Right.
suddenly now I could buy that, nice hardware package, because PC hardware was like generally junky. Like there's lots of things that sucked about the PC era, and so you could get a Mac and you didn't have to pay that tax of being like having like all this incompatible software, because there was more and more stuff that was compatible with it. And so you would show up to class or to school like in college with your like hipster iBook, and people would be like, a lot of people would be like, the nerds would be like, how can you even use that thing? And you're like, well, it works on it works on the same websites you go to, and it's got Unix underneath, and and so like actually the nerds ironically adopted it first, and you started seeing more and more Macs, and now basically everybody has a Mac, right? Okay, so that's
Right.
like fast forwarding, but I mean, and this is in no way, I don't have a gift of prophecy or anything, but like I was one of those pretty early people on the sort of early aughts, mass conversion to Apple and away from PCs.
Right.
And when I think about and reflect on it, it's because a lot of technologies and a lot of external things all converge to make this possible, right?
Yes.
And so I think that, there's an analogy there in terms of what can enable a movement like Noahidism, to use the word, is that you've got to have a world where Jews aren't actively being hunted or killed. You're not going to be killed by converting away from Christianity. I mean, like these things sound really ridiculous, saying in 2024, and frankly, like the Jews still don't have it easy, but like you're not going to be harmed by declaring yourself to be an atheist or something, right? So like you have the conditions of possibility where you have you could actually make that decision to leave one religion and go practice another one. You've got the I mean, I think there's other types of kinds of signs and world events that have converged. This is obviously an anti-Zionist channel, but like the state of Israel does exist, and Jews are going and living there now, and Jews can live there, and and they have survived a lot of onslaughts over the past 50, 60 some odd years, and so I think if you pay attention, I think you see a lot of things converging on this, and so I to kind of get into like my Noahide messianism, like I think you are going to see in 10 years from now, you might look back on this conversation and be like, wow, remember when like that one rando Noahide person I met on the internet, and now all of a sudden like the Messiah is here and everything has happened. Like this was crazy. It's happened so fast, right? Like I think that's very possible.
Yeah. You know who also believed that?
Who?
Paul.
Yeah, but Paul, fell off his horse or whatever and had like a blinding vision and did a whole bunch of I mean, that was a totally different circumstance.
Oh yeah, it's not like there was a bunch of people, you know, Gentiles interested in Judaism at that time, and it wasn't until a very strong leader like Paul took hold that he was able to basically turn it into something else. That didn't happen at all. I'm kidding. I'm being a little facetious. My mind is running out. I agree, and I think that's also a part of why people like being early adopters, is because it's like this idea of I'm on the cutting edge. And I guess what I mean, I'm not saying like when I say sheeple or when Garth says sheeple and everything like that. I just mean that like people have restricted cognition. Like they're not going to think about everything, right? Like it's like
Yeah.
stocks. Most people are just going to invest in the S&P 500, but then there's some people who are like, yeah, I'm going to get really invested in stocks. But it's like, why would I
Yep.
take the time to be as invested in this? I'm rather just going to trust my friend on religion. It seems like he's doing as well. I may as well convert to. I want my life to be well. I think that's how most people work. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think that right. So as Noahidism matures and progresses, you're going to need to have a little more of a prepackaged, consumer-friendly version of it. I think yes, and maybe that includes more of a menu of sort of rituals or I should say like practices, um, things you can do. Um, and I don't, I don't know what that is going to look like. Like I am
Reform?
hoping. What's that?
Reform Judaism?
Yeah, but yeah, but Reform Judaism. I mean, that's no. It's different. It's different. I mean, is it going
I think
like
you're going to get orthodoxy. I think you're just going to get orthodox light. I think there's going to be
you're going to
Gentile
get
stuff.
Orthodox Judaism light?
I just like. Would you say like we talked about Christmas, but would you say like a Noahide couldn't celebrate Purim or Hanukkah?
Well, I mean, again, there's ways to celebrate these things that don't necessarily entail doing them as a commandment that was not given to you,
Right.
right? Um, and I think there's, think it I think it was Rabbi Shulman who was saying that like that one of the dangers of like performing a mitzvah that's not commanded to you voluntarily, just sort of for the sake of heaven or for the sake of the reward, is that like it's hard to like sort of decouple in your mind that you're doing it sort of um, exclusively for that purpose, and that like you're not actually obligated to do it. Um, I didn't. I don't know that I agree with that take, but I see what his point was, and like I know that for me, I don't think I fall into that trap much. Like I think I can kind of I can disassociate where I can say like, yeah, I can do this commandment because it's maybe a good thing to do, and maybe I can get a reward for it or something, or whatever. It's a nice thing, but like can know that like I'm not doing it because I'm obligated. Um, but like I definitely think that it's a good and praiseworthy thing um, to at least commemorate, Hanukkah, Purim, but it's not yet clear, sort of that there's an established prescribed way of doing it,
Right.
and
But
I
like
think
again,
and having it be sort of a like an ad hoc free for all, like well go I guess you're on your own to try to figure out what to do, like that's tough, and for someone like me who doesn't have a whole ton of time, even though I might have um, the mental ability to read and like learn, but like I don't have Purim plans like this week. It's like it's happening. That's cool, but like I didn't do anything for Hanukkah either. It's cold here. I don't want to go out to a menorah lighting. So like um, I don't make any claims to be like the most like uh, righteous Gentile in the world, but like I definitely see your point though of like having a little more prescription and having, I mean, certainly having like community resources, right? Like the best you're going to get for, someone like me is like the local Chabad house, which, and even then they don't always know what to do or make of you, when you show up, so, and in a lot of cases, it's a pretty small, relatively insular community. And so, they're like, you're sort of this outsider. Like, you want to show up and participate. It's like, it can be a tough sell. And that kind of
Yeah.
thing will have to change.
Yeah. I think a difference as this conversation is that I think you think noahidism is very individualistic. I think it can eventually become a group thing. I think that's the differences of what I'm talking about. Like, for example, when I said the Purim thing, you were like, well, I don't know how someone can celebrate, but I'm thinking of like average Joe Noahide is going to be like, yeah, Orthodox Jews are doing it. Why can't I do it? Like, and I feel like that's usually what makes up a congregation. Like, you have like people in the middle, people who don't really care that much, and then people who care a lot. And there's like different ranges of that. But like, yeah.
No, I mean, I see what you mean. I think right now you can't not be an individual, sort of an individualist Noahide in particular places and cultures and contexts, right? Like, and again, like, I don't know that I use the church model as my like predominant model for thinking about the future of Noahides. Like, okay, so there's going to be some Noahide congregation, down the street, right? And so like, you're going to have people being born into it. Maybe it's under the supervision of the local rabbi or whatever, right? But like, okay, fine. But to your point, there's eventually going to be people who like, they're out there seeking, and they decide, that Saturday or Sunday or whatever day, I guess, well, maybe Sunday is not a good time for it, but whatever time they're, the Noahides get together to pray, right? And so, you're going to have people that are going to show up, and they're going to be like, especially in the earlier days, right? Where what else do they know but like, the local flavors of like, mainline Protestantism or whatever kind of Protestant denominations, maybe they're Catholic, whatever, right? But like, they're sort of going to expect or have that familiar, they're going to maybe crave that familiarity of, it feels like a church. That's phone Tre.
Okay, sorry, I had to drop my phone.
Did you catch that last part though? I was basically saying, like, I mean, you can imagine it looking like church.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that is a sort of like Anglo-centered model, but I just feel like, what else could there be? Like, it seems that you're naturally going to gravitate towards this thing. And it seems like if we look at other Noahide communities, they're doing the same thing. And especially within a Christian context. Like, it just does not make sense for me that, like, for example, a Christian's going to be, like, walking around the Hindu temple, or an ex-Christian. Like, it's just not going to work like that. They're going to modify it to their own context.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's possible. I mean, but you can also look at a Christian denomination like the Catholic Church,
Yeah.
and see how you can still have a very consistent experience, a consistent ritual, lots of consistency and sameness across the whole world, with local flavor of, different music, different stylistic things, and and sometimes they, right?
Right, but why is that? Like, the reason is because we had the conversion, I would say, from like the Latin Mass to the North Soto. I mean, I know there's a lot of complexities,
Well,
but
no,
I would say history factors in a lot of those differences.
Well, I mean, probably the earlier you get, the more variations there are regionally, but there were a lot more similarities, and the the switch over from the Latin to, or the Tridentine rite to the Novus Ordo after Vatican II, like, that was still a like a sort of all at once, all across the board, right? It's more of like the general point is that you can have consistency even at a global institutional level if there is a strong enough authority and enough guardrails. And I mean,
Yeah.
even if you look and if you drill down into, say, a Catholic church, if you look at it at the a larger regional scale, you're going to see differences and similarities to another religion. If you drill down deeper into a more particular region, you're going to start seeing more particularities, different expressions of just different tastes in music and architecture and all kinds of stuff that are all valid. And maybe some are better or worse, and there's no accounting for taste, but you're going to get diversity in a lot of the expression, but there are lots of areas where there's like tolerance and openness to that, because there is not necessarily a set prescribed way.
Yeah. I feel like this is a good point to sort of talk about, since we're running, I know you have to go soon. I sort of wanted to talk about the modern day comparison between noahides and, I guess, because you and I would, because you're comparing it to the Catholic Church as a continuous sort of phenomenon, right? And I would compare it more to like new religious movements like Seventh-day Adventists, Mormons,
Okay, but I think that here's the difference, and is that Seventh-day Adventists, Mormons, they all started with a charismatic leader, right?
Not exactly, no. I would say that it was groups of people that eventually that had their own similar beliefs that a charismatic leader was able to sort of pick up.
So with Mormonism, there was a bunch of organic Mormons that kind of cropped up, and Joseph Smith just rallied them together, like.
So if I understand correctly, during the time of Joseph Smith, there's a lot of I guess you could say American folklore. So these ideas that you could go into the forest and that there was a bunch of people who could find seer stones and everything like that. So there was already collective ideas.
The conditions were ripe for
yes.
for a leader to emerge out of that.
And a lot of people thought it was the end times because there was a transitioning in America and everything like that. And here we have Joseph Smith sort of placating those ideas. He's using these American folklores of the seer stone, of all this stuff to sort of gain people. He's saying it's Armageddon. So I don't think that would be my argument to say that like it's not just charismatic leader, boom. It's like we have these ideas floating in the air.
Sure. I think the difference, though, and I'm willing to say that noahides represent a third or fourth category, like a qualitatively different category than the others, right? Where, because on one hand, they're hitching their wagons to a very ancient tradition, Judaism, right? However, they're doing it in a context that certainly hasn't flourished much over the last 2,000 years.
Yeah, well, that's also what I wanted to talk about, because like what I would say they're anchoring to, at least seems to me, is the Third Temple Institute specifically. I mean, that's the people that are answering most of their questions, at least in the example of the Philippines. So I would say, like, I don't think Noahide has gotten to that point where basically larger Jewish organizations, especially Orthodox, aside from the Temple Institute, are giving advice to the average parishioner, like we saw with the paper in the Philippines.
Right.
So, like, because I'll explain what I think of this.
Well, hang on. So just to maybe make your sort of set the stage for your point, like you have analogously to like the Joseph Smith scenario, you have this you have the situation now where the stage has been set, and there are a lot of groups, individuals or communities who are suddenly kind of like coming out of Christianity, maybe, or like coming into Judaism as non-Jews, and they're like, okay, so we think we're Noahides or something like that, right? And so you have this kind of emergent phenomenon, but that is then finding its way into connection with Orthodox Judaism, right? Rabbinical authorities, whatever, institutions, Chabad houses, whatever. And there are these institutions that are now starting to, do the work of guiding these emergent, nascent Noahide, people. Yeah.
Yeah, can I give some more descriptions?
Yeah. Go
Like,
ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
so like I would say that specifically evangelicals who are raised in a Zionist context where
Yeah.
Israel was already an important issue, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Very much, as well as maybe more apocalyptic in nature, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Are
Yeah.
sort of aligning with a lot of Zionist Jews on this issue, right? They're both talking
Sure.
about Israel. They're both talking about the
Okay.
fulfillment of this, right?
Yep. Yep.
Now,
Yep.
now they have a similarity because in Jewish Zionism it says the Gentiles will worship the true God of Israel, right?
Yep.
So I think that those are the ideas are floating in the air that sort of makes it so that you can have this coalition. That's what it seems like to me. Like I don't really hear that many Catholics doing it. It seems mostly to be Southern Protestants, or at least Protestant congregations that are linked to Judaism in some sort of way.
Yeah. So there's kind of the ground is more fertile for that kind of an attachment, and like there's already sort of a connection there, at least one way. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I do think that you're like I can't imagine a Catholic parish suddenly, converting en masse to Noahide belief. I mean, you would have to have an apostate priest
Yes.
who would have the charisma and well, I mean charisma, but like also have like managed to, you know, managed to pull the whole like the parish into it. Like it is sure the dynamics there are much different. So I think, it's probably I wouldn't expect to see that as often. You would probably expect to see more one-off individual Catholics, making that decision. Case in point. But yeah, so I definitely see that connection that if you have a sort of outright Zionist or quasi-Zionist like evangelicals or Christians who have a much more pro-Israel, pro-Jewish bent, and like ironically a lot of times it's because they're just like super interested in the Jews converting so Jesus can come back, and then through the course of their realization that like that's not going to happen, and so they don't lose the Zionist tilt. So I mean certainly. I think the Third Temple Institute too is like somewhat Zionist. Is that maybe an understatement? Like I'm not super familiar. I think I've watched a few of their videos.
It's like okay, Jacob's gonna disagree with me, but I think looking at the history, very, very Zionist, like very Zionist. Like I think they say like, yeah, we're gonna build the Temple Mount ourselves. No one's gonna stop us, and we're going to like install leaders to do it. But
yeah, but again, they're religious though, right? So I mean, there's a flavor to their Zionism.
Yeah. I mean, I think
that's we should have a separate
stream to talk about it. I want to before Jacob yells at me.
Yes,
I would say those are different figures within the Third Temple Institute, and I think Jacob's response is those aren't the main leaders now. But I just recommend people looking at the history of the Temple Institute to see like how it was founded and the different leaders and their thoughts at least.
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly more institutions of Judaism that are connected to Noahide than just the Third Temple Institute.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's worrying that like it seems as though the people who are going to take hold of Noahides are Zionists, and that's like a little disturbing.
Well, I mean, why?
Why?
I mean, there's, eventually, this is why we should have a separate conversation about Zionism or just those sorts of topics, because I mean, now we're going off into a different direction. But like, there's a, I mean, yes, I mean, I would expect. I mean, Zionism is a loaded term, capital Z Zionism, and like, it's got a lot of baggage and stuff. But like, one day, the Jews will return to Israel, and Mashiach will come, and things will change in the world, and we'll be in a messianic age. And at that point, everyone will be a Zionist, but not in the Zionist, not in the way that Zionism is understood today.
Right. I would like. Okay. It's just how I look at different leaders of new religious movements. It seems like they have a strong idea of apocalypticism, and Zionism involves apocalypticism. Like,
I mean,
okay.
Judaism has been apocalyptic for a long time. I mean, this isn't the,
right.
This isn't the first rodeo for Judaism and Messianism. I mean, this is every situation looks like it's going to happen. And so I'm aware of that. I mean, there's a.
Then you can't be mad at Paul. I think that's the difference.
Which Paul?
Paul of Tarsus.
Paul of Tarsus. Well, I can't be mad at him. Why not?
Well, okay. From what Bart Ehrman says, okay, he's a little guy, blah 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 blah. But at the very least, that when Paul thought of Jesus being resurrected, he thought the end was coming. Pretty much, he thought the end was happening, right? And
sure.
How he kept getting confirmed that the end was going to come was that all these Gentiles were converting to Judaism, pretty much, and they were sort of putting on these ideas of Judaism. And I think that, like, you can only say to Paul, like, oh yeah, you just got noahidism just a little wrong, or like his ideas of what Gentiles should do, which is a little wrong, and like.
There's nothing Noahide about what Paul was teaching.
Yeah, I would say. Yeah, there was.
No. Paul thought that Jesus was God, and thought that
I would disagree that I don't think Paul thought Jesus was God. Sam Tinneman is also going to disagree that Paul thought Jesus was God. At the very least, if we take a historical view, Paul is a Jew, that he then thinks that Jesus is being resurrected, and that the resurrection is occurring pretty much, and the end is pretty much nigh. And one sign of the end being nigh is that Gentiles converting, and so he's calling all these Gentiles to abandon their gods.
Where is that a sign that the end is nigh, that Gentiles convert?
It's in Isaiah. It says all the nations will call upon the name Yahweh.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean they're becoming Jews.
No. It just means they have reverence. For again,
you use the word conversion, which I mean. Just to be clear, I mean, I would not be surprised if there was an emergent movement of God-fearers at the time. Like, I guess, call them the Noahides of the day.
I linked in the Discord a very interesting academic talks about it, and this idea of conversion and God-fearers, because from archaeological evidence, God-fearers could actually worship other gods other than Hashem. There's inscriptions of pagans pretty much going to the god of Apollos and then going to the shul. And there's inscriptions in shuls of pretty much like dual sanctifications of those ideas. And I think the reason why there were so many Gentiles in those shuls is because they thought the end was coming.
But why would they be there?
Because the sign of the end of the coming is Gentiles going. And to basically live righteously, you need... I think that was part of it. The professors don't mention it, but I would not be surprised if that was involved.
I mean, we should probably have a separate conversation too, because you posted that like Myth Vision video about the pagan Gentile
Yeah.
God-fearers, right? So I don't know much about that. I'd have to dig into that a little bit, but like the combination of some biblical scholar academic on Myth Vision, I'll have to do a little more digging into to understand that, because I find it hard to believe that there were like, well, anyway, like, I don't know much about it, but I'm skeptical.
I think that what you're not not realizing is how complex Jewish and Roman sort of ideas were. I mean, like King Herod was technically a Jew, but he was also a pagan at the same time, and he was like the lord over Jerusalem.
Well, so why is he identified as a pagan?
Because oh man, I'm trying to remember my Jerusalem book, but basically he was Jewish. Jacob can correct me, but basically he was Jewish by blood, but he worshipped and did sacrifice to the Roman gods. And he had allegiances to the Romans. So he was sort of like a double agent, where he would pretty much go to the Jews as a Jew and then go to the Romans as a Roman, because I think his father was Roman and his mother was Jewish. This is,
and so that and that's a good thing.
No, I'm saying that like I think
just because these things happen doesn't necessarily mean they were a good thing, right? So
right, no, but what I'm trying to say is this idea of God-fearers is way more complex than we're just saying, oh, it's Noahides, or oh, it's just like Gentiles being righteous. It's like way
no. I mean, look,
it's
yeah. I mean, in Noahides come in lots of shapes and sizes, and I mean, I think you can probably find a Muslim who is a Noahide, as long as they're not, I mean, at least ostensibly on the face of it.
Right. But like, you do have to agree that like these discussions on what is and what isn't a Noahide didn't occur until like Maimonides, right?
I don't know. I mean, we don't have a record. I don't know what records don't exist. You know, I mean, it's like you're talking about history now. So like now it's getting into a very murky place. And I mean, I'm not an expert in it, but I know that there, theories abound. And
at the very least, we don't have evidence of Jewish discussions on the term Noahide in the 1st and 3rd century. We have God-fearers, but we don't have the term Noahide until Maimonides.
Yeah, sure, but you don't. I don't even know if I'm not sure if Maimonides uses the word Noahide either. That could be a neologism. Like it doesn't matter. We're talking about the same thing. We're talking about the same.
No. I would disagree. I think that what we're talking about is like very, because again, because your definitions of the Noahide laws, right, are coming from a post-Christian context, as well as like way centuries later of different definitions, as well as different commentaries in the Talmud. Can anybody in the chat correct me if I'm wrong that Maimonides coined the term Noahide, or at least he came up, like, who came up with the Noahide laws, or the civic definition of these are the laws that I believe it was Maimonides. Unless someone in the chat will help me.
I mean,
if not, correct that.
I'm pretty sure it has been re-articulated and codified over time, but it's not as if I think it's totally false that, like, in some post-Christian century, the rabbis got together and sort of just like, voila, here are the Noahide laws.
I disagree with that, but
I mean, we should dig into that, because like they were codified over time. I mean, there weren't like the 7 commandments that were written on the stone tablets given to Moses, right?
Right.
So they do come from different articulations of commandments given by God to people. I mean, starting with Adam, at least with, I mean, certainly with Noah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I feel like that's a separate stream talking about the third temple, or probably talking about God-fears in the past and those comparisons.
How much battery do you have left on your phone?
Well, I'm in my car, so I can charge. I have 39%.
Oh, you can charge in your car.
Yeah,
Until
I
you
can go as long as you want to go.
until you run out of gas
Yeah.
or battery. Do you drive an EV?
Okay. No.
I thought you were woke, Trey.
Who said I was woke? Okay.
Yeah, nobody.
Nobody. Yeah.
There's some good comments here. I'm just going through them really quickly.
Yisharim, Malachites.
Yeah. This was from half an hour ago or so, but Jacob had posted a video about an initiation ceremony in New York for a Noahide. I'm not sure if it was an initiation ceremony, but that was me. I accepted upon myself the 7 laws of Noah in front of three Jewish adult male Torah scholars. So an ad hoc Jewish court. I'm not sure if it's official and it wasn't recorded. So I might do it again, but I'm officially official. Gartham said, I would say that if your authority has changed to someone like a rabbi, that seems like a conversion to me. I mean, yeah, conversion with a small c. I think that's fair. Bunch of comments came in while we were yakking, so they lost.
Sandy asked about, I think, about the Philippines, if they're connected to the larger Noahide community, and I would say yes. They're technically the largest Noahide community. Actually, is this large congregation that converted to Noahides inside the Philippines. Yeah. And someone asked, I think in the chat, why I'm dressed up. I came from work.
Unbutton that collar. Relax.
Oh, okay, fine.
I'm just playing. Dan Smith says the term Noahide was coined by a rabbi in France in the late 1800s.
Yes,
yeah, I could believe that. I mean, it's looks like he even quoted cited a source from asknoah.org. Well, we should wrap this up. I should probably go, but this was a good start, Trey, to the Future of the Noahide Movement series. We should do it again. You should. So I did watch that video quickly on MythVision, but I didn't quite. I'll watch it again. I was kind of distracted, but like we should dig into yeah, go ahead.
There's a lecture I posted in the links, and where it's that same scholar, and she goes through basically her argument, which is really interesting, is that religion is only ethnic back in the day, and this idea of conversion isn't really a one-to-one idea, and that basically pagans just viewed Hashem as another set of the gods. So she goes into that, and it's a more, I would say, better lecture, and there's like a very good to understand. Yeah.
All right, I'll look at it, and I will. I'll be in touch. All right, thanks, Trey.
Thanks for coming on.
All right, I will. I'll kill it.
I'll kill it. See you.